to you
let's
how
play
what
some
you said
damn
is just
shit,
an
you
inversion.
slut.
What the Bible...
Wicked.
Okay.
Which is why you're atheist, talking bad about God.
We heard what you... We heard...
Inherently evil.
We heard what you said, but I explained...
Evil.
We heard what you said, but I explained to you how
Come on, you slut that whore.
What the Bible says is, everybody is deserving of punishment, but if you believe the right things about Jesus, you don't get the punishment. There's a divine pardon handed out to everyone, as long as they're convinced of the right things. And if you're not convinced of the right things, you don't get the divine pardon. Therefore, people are being punished by withdrawal of the divine pardon for not being convinced. That's what it boils down to. Are you able to justify that morally? Are you able to... We've heard that bit. Let me grant you... Hang on. Okay. I'm going to grant you for the sake of the argument, just for now.
Now let's see if I can Donkey Kong the fuck.
But just for now, I'm going to grant you that we're all evil. Evil babies. All babies are evil. All kids are evil. The toddlers in the nursery, they're all evil. Everyone is evil. Everybody, I'm just granting you the thing you're saying. So everybody deserves... I'm not appealing to anything. I'm granting you temporarily your point. Because you keep on going back to it. I'm granting you your point temporarily so I can show you why it's irrelevant. So let's say we grant you your point that all people, men, women, old, young, children, babies, all of us are evil. And then we're going to look at what God's plan is for what we do about that evil, right? How is it dealt with? And the way it's dealt with is he had himself nailed to a tree briefly. And now anybody who's sufficiently grateful for this gets a divine pardon.
He's taking a ride in the stupid machine.
But people who don't feel gratitude for this nonsense because they don't believe it. It sounds like I have just enough understanding to be able to speak about this. Well, okay. So
the Bible says that because God is a just God, right?
Yes.
Evilness, right?
Exactly.
So he had to what?
So he had to have himself nailed to a piece of wood, right? He had to have himself nailed to a piece of wood. Right, he has to judge the evil. Exactly. Yes, delightful. He's got a masochistic streak which we can all be impressed by. Now, having done that ludicrous act, he then, as I said before, a number of times, offers everybody a free pardon, correct? A gift. The good news. The good news is that not everyone, all of us dirty, disgusting, worm-like sinners, not all of us have to get set on fire by Jesus, correct?
That's fucking disgusting.
We have. If you want to accept the gospel. So thank you for finally arriving at the point I've been trying to get you to. So, all the people are going to get set on fire by Jesus unless they accept the gospel.
God damn it.
But you can't accept the gospel if you're not persuaded that it's true. And therefore, all of this rests on your own persuasion being the moral test. And if you can't do anything about the persuasion, you're going to get punished anyway. And you think that's good.
Yeah, so you goddamn shit. As a human being, you know better than God, so you rejected the gospel because you deceived yourself into believing that your way is better. So pride is the reason why God rejects humanity. With pride, you believe you know better than God, which is what you're doing right now.
God damn it.
We're seeing the manifestation of evil in the world through you.
Right, in your twisted mind, you think it's evil to simply be honestly unconvinced of something. The irony about that is that you are unconvinced of a multitude of other religious claims from other faiths, and you don't see that. You don't see that as a moral dereliction, do you? But exactly the same thing that you're saying I should be punished for is something that you do also, which is to not be convinced by the claims of Islam, to not be convinced by the claims of Mormonism, to not be convinced by the claims of Hinduism, all of these other religions. You know,
you
know what it's like. I don't believe we evolved from rats. I don't believe we evolved from rats either. But all of these other religions that you find yourself unconvinced of, you know what it's like to be unconvinced of something. I'm just doing the same thing.
I don't claim ignorance like you. You say you don't know why you exist, why everything exists. You admit ignorance.
Yes, it's called intellectual honesty, my friend. Called intellectual honesty. Rather than pretending to be on personal speaking terms with the creator of the universe, who has a special plan just for you, I don't go there. I'm a bit more humble than that. I just say, I don't know. Yep.
So if you don't know,
God fucking damn it.
You've been ignorant. I don't go to university to hear an ignorant professor tell me he's ignorant. I need someone who knows something to teach me.
But the thing is,
fucking Christ.
well, you called in, but
Come on,
that's
you
not my
motherfucker.
But so the thing is,
Goddamn
ignorance
motherfucker.
is taken as a pejorative term. But it isn't necessarily so.
Goddamn
Ignorance just means stuff you don't know. I'm absolutely okay to say there's stuff I know about and stuff I don't know about.
Goddamn
I'm okay with that.
motherfucker.
It doesn't mean that I'm stupid or fundamentally lacking in anything. It just means when it comes to certain things, like why does anything exist at all, I don't tend to have the answer. I don't delude myself into knowing into thinking that I have the secrets of the universe, and that the secret is really, a friend of mine did it. If you're going to call that ignorant, if you're going to frame that as being ignorance in a way which is a problem, fill your boots if it makes you feel superior.
But you can't tell me how everything exists, but suddenly you just know everything about God and everything He planned is stupid because you said so. I think you're not only ignorant, you're also a narcissist and you're manifesting evil.
I love this idea that the way you see it is that intellectual honesty is manifesting evil.
Goddamn motherfucker.
What makes you say that?
Goddamn motherfucker. Goddamn motherfucker.
You're promoting evil. You're doing everything evil. It's common sense to see that it's evil because anything against God must be logically evil. You're eating His food. You're using the bodysuit that He gave you. You're sleeping with His women. You're raising His kids.
I'm sorry. Did you say sleeping with His women?
You like men? Okay, well, cat, dog, whatever you like.
Did you say his? Sleeping with his people? Is that what you said?
Yeah, everything belongs to God, logically, right? God made everything belongs to God, right?
What a horrible...
resources, you're breathing in air, you're breathing His oxygen, the lips that you're using right now to talk against Him, He gave you all that.
Right.
So logically, if God is evil, then you have to be evil too, because you're a product of an evil God. That's how logic works.
It's actually how logic fails. It's how logic crashes against the rocks in a ball of flames. Because God could be evil and have created the world. It wouldn't necessarily flow from that all the creations within the world are evil. It's completely possible that God is evil and I'm not evil.
Yeah, if God, no, that's possible. If you're a product of a corrupt God, then that corrupt God makes corrupt things.
Why?
That's just common sense.
It's not common sense. Why would everything made by corrupt persons be corrupt? If I know a baker and he makes lovely cakes, but he's a bad person, he lies and steals and cheats, does that mean there's something wrong with his cakes?
I mean, I personally wouldn't eat his cakes because I wouldn't be able to trust him.
Really?
Yeah. So if everything hangs off everything was created by God, everything, it must be full of flaws, right? Because why? A God of mistakes or God of corruption also creates things of corruption. You can't be any greater than your master. You can't be greater than your creator.
Man, look
I
at
tell
this
you
goddamn
what, if you think that we were created by God, I think that I am better than my creator because, for example, I don't think that slavery is ever acceptable and God loves it. I also don't think that disobedient children should be killed by their parents and the people in the village. But God thinks that.
Then you support injustice then. You also will let crime happen. It is moral, subjective to you guys. These things aren't bad. Subjective moral.
Can we let's just pause for a moment and reflect on what you just said, Bob. So I said that I don't think that disobedient children should be killed by their parents, and you said you think that would be me letting crime happen. So let's just clarify this. Are you in favour of children being killed by their parents?
No, sir. No, not me. But I'm not.
But do you think that it was a good thing when God commanded people to have their own children killed? Was that a good thing?
I think that was something that could bring order and teach children at that time to obey their parents and take it seriously, because the parents were representative of God on earth. So if you disobey the parents, eventually you start disobeying God, or maybe become an atheist or something. Nobody wants that.
So just to clarify your position, God in Deuteronomy 21:18, you'll know this, says that parents who have disobedient sons should have them stoned to death. Your position is that you think this was a good thing.
No, I said, me personally, no. I'm not God. I'm not to the level of God.
I'm asking you, I'm not asking you if you're God. I'm asking you if you think it's good. For anyone who doesn't know about this verse, I'll show it on the screen. If someone has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey his father and mother, who does not heed them when they discipline him, then his father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his town. They shall say to the elders of the town, "This son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He's a glutton and a drunkard." Then all the men of the town shall stone him to death. So you think that it's good for disobedient sons to be stoned to death, for their parents to organise for their children to be stoned to death?
You bucket.
Wait, quick question. If you don't believe in God and God doesn't exist, aren't you being anti-Semitic? Because you're taxing someone's culture.
I'm asking you. I'm asking you.
Me personally, I wouldn't do something like that.
No, I'm not asking you whether you do it. I'm asking if this was a good law.
Oh, by God's standards, yeah. I think God's standards is...
By your standards. By your standards.
Oh, goddamn motherfucker.
So God was wrong in your view to pass this law?
No, I agree with God totally. He doesn't...
So you do think it was a good law?
I fucked his... Oh,
I think God
sucker.
knows what he's doing. I think he understands.
I didn't ask you.
I was looking at that.
Doing. I'm asking
Sucker.
you if you think it's a good law.
Fucker.
I think it's good by God's standards, sure.
I'm asking you by your standards, is this a good law?
My personal standards, I don't think I'm that righteous. I don't compare myself to God.
I'm not asking you to compare yourself to God. I'm asking for your opinion about this law. Is it good, or was it ever good, for children to be stoned to death by the village and their parents?
I think God understood what he was doing in infinite wisdom. He established law because it was being broken.
So you think it was good?
Goddamn motherfucker.
I think justice is a good thing. I think we don't understand everything.
I agree that justice is a good thing. I don't think that teaching parents to have their children killed is justice. I think it's completely depraved. And I think you are depraved too.
Wait, you gotta slow down. Don't you believe that morals are subjective?
Yes.
So the meaning or definition of subjective morals means that there is no right or wrong or good or evil. So how do you ground your morals?
Subjective morals doesn't mean there is no right and wrong. It just means that right and wrong. It means that right and wrong derive from minds. That minds assess actions and find those actions to be morally right or wrong. That's what it means. It doesn't mean that they don't exist. It doesn't mean that they're arbitrary. It just means that they derive from minds. So according to this mind, and everybody else's mind who isn't mentally unwell, parents having their children stoned to death, not good. According to your mind, good.
Could you have developed that opinion because you were raised in a Christian society, learned Christian morals, and
come on, you smack that.
Fortunately for me, I didn't learn Christian morals. I was spared any of that insane babble by my family, who I was not really raised in a Christian society, particularly.
Where did you grow up?
In the UK.
Oh, so they weren't Christian. They didn't know anything about Christianity.
There was very little religion in my world growing up. Very little.
Yeah, but the surrounding, the laws that was around you, they reflect.
Funnily enough, I looked up the laws in the UK on having your children stoned to death. You go to prison for it.
Yeah, because the UK was a Christian nation, and they knew right from wrong from the Bible.
So they knew that. What you're saying is that they knew God made a bad law. Is what you're arguing.
No, what I'm saying is that your subjective morality, if you grew up in Rome, you would have done what the Romans did, because that was subjective morals. Rome was known to conquer people and great people and essay little children. So that means 9 times out of 10 you've done exactly what they have done because your morals are subjective.
Which is by the way also something that God commands, isn't it?
Yeah, but no, he doesn't command that.
In the book of
Subjective morals means that morals are an opinion. There's not necessarily anything wrong with wrong.
Yeah,
That's what subjective morals mean.
It doesn't mean that at all. I mean, the thing is, there are atheists who believe that moral truths exist, and there are atheists that don't. I happen to be one currently that doesn't. I'm open to. I'm speaking right now. I'm open to having my mind changed about that, but currently, I don't think that there are. Right? So it's not an atheistic thing. It's just a particular view on ethics.
If you believe in subjective morals, you're admitting that you're immoral. Because subjective morals means that grape is not necessarily wrong because the grape is rape.
Okay.
Has an opinion that it might be right.
Right now, you're clueless because you don't know how to tell the difference between somebody saying that my ethical intuitions stem from a mind, and someone saying it's just a free-for-all and nothing is really right and wrong. And you're getting confused between those two. So I can ground my morals quite easily. I can ground my morals quite easily.
So we all believe that the world has immorality in it.
No, we cannot. It's not quite like that. I don't think immorality is a thing in the world. I think that when we apply our ethical intuitions and judgments to acts, and we say this act is ethical, this act is not ethical, but I don't think that immorality is a thing that exists.
All right, what about justice? Is justice objectively needed in the world?
I don't know what objectively needed means, but justice involves making sure that people, or trying to ensure that people get what they deserve in a given situation. So, for example, an example of justice would be, for example, when someone commits a crime, the person who did the crime is punished, and the people who didn't do the crime aren't punished. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Okay. So is God always just? Yes. So that would mean that God then never punishes people for the crimes of others, correct?
No, because the scriptures say that all men are sinners, and the wages of sin is
No. Just blanket saying everyone deserves to be killed doesn't give you a legal argument to punish anyone for any crime that anyone does. That's like saying a guy commits a murder, I can come and execute you for the murder because you happen to be a sinner too. I said to you before, justice is punishing people for the crimes they do and not punishing innocent people, and you agree with that. And then I asked you if God was just, and you said he is. And now I'm going to show you where God punishes a bunch of people, for a crime that they didn't do. So here he is punishing 70,000 people.
Okay, so do you want to use Bible verses? Let's run the Bible verses.
Yeah, so Second Samuel, talk less.
This guy sounds like a nigger on the
2
north.
Samuel 24. God is punishing
This guy sounds like a nigger.
of the people of Israel because David did a census. So by the definition you gave, this is not just, because it's punishing people for a crime they didn't do. So do you want to take the definition back?
Yeah, they didn't do a particular crime, but they all were sinners, and at any given time.
But that's not justice. That's just you issuing yourself and issuing God a theological hall pass to commit unlimited murder.
The Bible says no one is innocent. So but
they're innocent of that crime, my friend. That's what justice means. By this, okay, so let's stop and pause on this, because we've now reached the zenith. We've reached the zenith, and we've been on the call too long anyway. So as we end the call, we're going to reflect on the fact that the thing you've just said is every single person in the world is a sinner. Every single sinner deserves to be killed. So your idea is that God thinks that every single living person deserves to be punished and killed. And you wonder why I call him evil. Absolutely astonishing. That's where we got to. I know we let that drag on a little bit. But the point that he allowed the situation to get to, the conversation, is every single person in the world should be subject to capital punishment. And yet he thinks God is good. Unbelievable. What an absolutely crazy fanatic. I have spoken to Bob before, and he was just as unhinged last time, I remember. And a tragic misunderstanding of logic and dialectics, but hey, we won't hold that against him too much. Maybe just a bit. Okay.
Goddamn motherfucking shit.
Imagine walking into a church in ancient Rome in the year 150 AD. The building is not a grand cathedral, it's someone's home, a hidden gathering place. The followers of Jesus are there, and something remarkable is happening. They're not observing the Sabbath on Saturday like their Jewish neighbors still do. Instead, they're gathering on Sunday morning, breaking bread and celebrating something they call the Lord's Day. And if you had asked them why, they could have given you answers that would eventually reshape the entire religious calendar of Western civilization. This shift from Saturday to Sunday is one of the most consequential religious changes in human history. Yet most people have never really thought about how it happened or why. Whether you're watching from a traditional mainline Protestant church, a Pentecostal congregation, a Catholic parish, or perhaps you're not religious at all but curious about how these traditions form, this is a question that touches something fundamental about how religions evolve and how human communities decide what matters to them. Before we go deeper, I want to know, where are you watching from? What church tradition were you raised in, if any? And more importantly, have you ever sat in a service on Sunday and wondered why it's Sunday and not Saturday? Leave a comment below. I genuinely want to know what brought you here.
No,
The story of why Christians changed their worship day is not a simple tale of a decree from above. It's a story tangled with history, theology, politics, and the slow, messy way that religious practices transform over centuries. And it begins, as so many Christian stories do, with a day that changed everything. In the Jewish tradition, the Sabbath, Saturday, was not just a day of rest. It was the day when God rested after creating the world. It appears in the very heart of the Torah, the commandment that God carved into stone tablets himself on Mount Sinai. To keep the Sabbath was to participate in something sacred, to obey one of the 10 Commandments directly. For any practicing Jew in the first century, the Sabbath was non-negotiable. You did not work. You did not kindle a fire. You did not travel beyond a certain distance. The Sabbath was woven into the identity of being Jewish, a weekly affirmation of covenant with God that stretched back over 1,000 years. So when Jesus' disciples and the earliest followers of the Jewish Rabbi Jesus continued to meet and pray, they did so largely within this Jewish framework. The first chapters of the book of Acts describe the disciples in Jerusalem going to the temple, observing Jewish festivals and maintaining their Jewish identity. They were not trying to start a new religion. They were convinced that Jesus was the Messiah, but they were still Jewish. They still kept kosher. They still honored the Sabbath. And yet something changed. Something began to shift in those earliest decades. By the time Paul wrote his letters, the earliest Christian documents we have, there are hints that the observance of the Sabbath was becoming contested among Christians. Paul, writing to the Romans around 55 AD, just 20 years or so after the crucifixion, addresses this tension directly. He tells his readers not to judge one another regarding food and feast days, and specifically mentions one person esteems one day as better than another, while another esteems all days alike. Paul is signaling that even in these early years, some Christians thought certain days mattered more than others, while other Christians thought all days were equal before God. What was happening here was a theological revolution, though few recognized it as such at the time. The early Christians were grappling with a radical question. If Christ has come, if Christ has died and risen again, what happens to the old laws? What happens to the Sabbath? This question would generate centuries of theological debate, and it drove a wedge between Christian communities and Jewish communities. The Gospels themselves contain Jesus seems to challenge Sabbath observance. Healing on the Sabbath, plucking grain on the Sabbath, actions that would have been scandalous to his contemporaries. In Mark's Gospel, Jesus tells his disciples that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, suggesting that human need takes precedence over Sabbath law. In John's Gospel, Jesus heals a man at the pool on the Sabbath and tells him to pick up his mat and walk, precisely the kind of work forbidden on Sabbath.
Fucking shit.
But here's where it gets interesting.
God
the Gospels
fucking
were
damn
written
it.
after the crucifixion, reflecting the theological debates of the early Christian community. We can't simply say Jesus rejected the Sabbath. The historical Jesus was Jewish and likely observed the Sabbath. But his followers, struggling to make sense of his death and resurrection, began to reinterpret everything about Jewish practice through the lens of what they believed had happened. The turning point came gradually, but there's one moment that stands out in the book of Acts. In Acts 20, Paul is in Troas, and it says he met with believers on the first day of the week to break bread. This is presented matter-of-factly, but it's actually a seismic shift. The first day of the week, Sunday, the day after the Sabbath, is mentioned as the day Christians gathered. Why Sunday? Because according to Christian tradition, it was the day Jesus rose from the dead. The resurrection happened on what we call Sunday morning, the first day of a new week, the day after the Sabbath rest. This is crucial. Sunday was not chosen arbitrarily. It was chosen because it carried theological weight. It pointed to the resurrection. It said that something new had happened in history, something so significant that it required a new day of worship. The shift was not immediate, and it was not uniform. By the late 1st century, there are references to something called the Lord's Day in Christian writings.
God damn it.
Ignatius of Antioch, writing around 110 AD, mentions Christians observing the Lord's Day instead of the Sabbath, and he called it Lord's Day, or a new day of worship.
Oh, that girl's cute. Let me screenshot her. Boop! I touched her head.
The shift was not immediate, and it was not uniform. By the late 1st century, there are references to something called the Lord's Day in Christian writings. Ignatius of Antioch, writing around 110 AD, mentions Christians observing the Lord's Day instead of the Sabbath, and he connects this explicitly to the resurrection. Ignatius tells Christians not to Judaize by keeping the Sabbath, but instead to keep the Lord's Day. This language, the warning against Judaizing, tells us that there was friction. Many Christians, particularly Jewish Christians in Judea and Syria, continue to observe the Sabbath. Ignatius is pushing back against this, arguing that Christians should embrace Sunday instead. But here's what often gets overlooked. As the 1st century turned into the 2nd century, another factor began to matter enormously: a demographic shift. The Christian movement, which had begun in Jerusalem among Jewish disciples and had spread through Jewish communities in the Mediterranean, began to include more and more non-Jewish converts. Gentiles were joining Christian communities. And for Gentiles, the Jewish Sabbath had no cultural or religious significance. Gentiles had their own religious calendars, their own days of worship tied to the gods of the Roman pantheon. As the proportion of Gentile Christians grew, practical arguments for Sunday worship became stronger. Sunday was not connected to Jewish law, which Gentile Christians increasingly resisted. For the mixed communities of Jewish and Gentile Christians, Sunday represented a kind of middle ground, a new day, tied to Christian identity specifically rather to Jewish tradition. The split between Christianity and Judaism was not instantaneous. It happened over decades, even centuries, and it was shaped by political events and theological choices. But the change in worship day was one of the key markers of this growing separation. When you change the day you worship, you're making a statement. We are not the same community anymore. We have something different. We have something new. Would you like to pause here and think about how this decision reverberates even today? If you are wondering about the connections between how religions form their traditions, hit that like button and subscribe to Professor Archive. We explore these kinds of deep historical and theological questions all the time. By the 2nd century, the Lord's Day, Sunday, was becoming established in Christian communities, at least in the Gentile majority churches. But there was still no unified Christian church, no worldwide authority saying everyone must worship on Sunday. Christianity was a network of local communities, some more connected to others, all interpreting their faith and their practices somewhat independently. Some Christian groups, particularly in Syria and the Eastern Mediterranean, continued to observe the Sabbath alongside Sunday, or instead of it, for centuries. And some groups simply added Sunday to their observance, without abandoning Saturday entirely. The theological arguments for Sunday worship were articulated more fully as the 2nd century progressed. An anonymous Christian writer from around 130 AD, usually called the author of the Epistle of Barnabas, wrote extensively about why Christians should move away from Sabbath observance. He argued that the Sabbath was a Jewish custom, rooted in Jewish law, and that Christians were freed from such laws through Christ. He presented the eighth day, Sunday, which came after the seventh-day Sabbath, as a symbol of a new creation and the promise of eternal rest in Christ. This is profound theology. The idea that Saturday represented the old world, the old covenant, while Sunday represented resurrection, newness, hope. But let's be clear about something. This theological shift, while presented as if it were based on scripture and doctrine, was also deeply shaped by social and political realities. As Christianity spread through the Roman Empire, it had to navigate a complex relationship with Jewish communities on one hand and with Roman authorities on the other. Observing the Sabbath, with its requirement for rest and cessation of work, might have been seen as a Jewish practice, something that marked Christians as Jewish. For communities trying to establish their own identity and independence, this was a problem. Sunday, by contrast, was not tied to Jewish law. It was just one day, and it was a day that was culturally distinct from the Sabbath. There's something else worth noting here. In the Roman Empire of the 1st and 2nd centuries, Sunday was not a day of rest for the general population. Roman workers still worked on Sunday. The only day off that the Roman Empire officially granted was for certain festivals. So when Christians began gathering on Sunday, they were doing something that required effort and sacrifice. They were choosing to make time for worship despite having other obligations. This actually made their commitment visible. To be a Christian might mean waking up early on Sunday before your workday to gather with your community. The very difficulty of this choice made it meaningful. The relationship between Christianity and the Roman state changed dramatically in the 4th century, and this had profound implications for when Christians worshipped. In 313 AD, the Roman Emperor Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, which granted religious tolerance throughout the Roman Empire. Suddenly, Christianity was no longer a persecuted sect. It was becoming an accepted religion, one that the emperor himself seemed to favor. Constantine had what he claimed was a vision that led to his adoption of the Christian faith, though scholars debate the sincerity and depth of his conversion. In 321 AD, Constantine issued a remarkable decree. He commanded that the day called the Day of the Sun should be a general rest day throughout the empire. This is the first time we see a secular ruler commanding that Sunday be observed as a day of rest. Constantine's law stated, and I'm paraphrasing from historical records, that judges, city dwellers, and the craftspeople should rest on the venerable day of the sun. Farmers, however, could continue their work on this day, as agricultural labor was too important to interrupt. Now, was Constantine doing this specifically for religious reasons, to promote Christian worship? Or was he doing this for political and social reasons, to establish a standard day of rest? The historical evidence suggests it was probably some of both. Constantine was shrewd. He was attempting to consolidate power and create unity. Now, was Constantine doing this specifically for religious reasons, to promote Christian worship? Or was he doing this for political and social reasons, to establish a standard day of rest? The historical evidence suggests it was probably some of both. Constantine was shrewd. He was attempting to consolidate power and create unity across a vast, diverse empire.
Fucking slut.
Establishing a universal day of rest was a practical administrative move. And the fact that this day happened to be sacred to both Christians and to followers of the sun cult, which was popular among soldiers and had been promoted by previous emperors, made it a politically savvy choice. Constantine could present this as honoring Christian worship while also honoring Roman traditions and maintaining social stability. Regardless of Constantine's motivations, the practical effect was enormous. Now you had the power of the Roman state enforcing a day of rest on Sunday. This made Sunday observance part of the fabric of Roman society, not just a Christian practice. Christian communities no longer had to choose between their livelihoods and their faith. They could gather on Sunday and rest with the force of imperial law behind them. In 325 AD, Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea, the first ecumenical council of the Christian Church. This council was called to address various theological disputes, particularly regarding the nature of Christ and the Arian controversy. It's famous for producing the Nicene Creed, one of Christianity's most important doctrinal statements. But the council also addressed practical matters of church life and discipline. While the council didn't specifically mandate Sunday, Sunday worship over Saturday, it did address the issue of
with Uzi Emily. The way she's holding her arm up like that, smelling like spit.
Christians who were Judaizing, still keeping the Sabbath or following Jewish practices. The Council's decisions generally supported the movement toward Sunday as the Christian day of worship. Interestingly, the Council also moved Easter, the Christian celebration of the resurrection, to a uniform date across the church. Before this, different Christian communities calculated Easter differently, and some celebrated it at the same time as Passover. The Council established a uniform method of calculating Easter, which further separated Christian practice from Jewish practice and marked Christianity as a distinct tradition. What's happening in this period is a formalization and Romanization of Christianity. As Christianity becomes the favored religion of the Roman state, its practices become standardized, regulated, and tied to the structures of power. Sunday worship is becoming not just a Christian practice, but a legal and civic obligation. By the 4th and 5th centuries, the shift from Saturday to Sunday was essentially complete in most of the Christian world. Sunday was now the Christian Sabbath, the day of rest and worship. The old Jewish Sabbath was abandoned by most Christian communities. In fact, in some places, the church began to actively discourage observance of the Sabbath, viewing it as a regression into Judaism. But there were holdouts. Throughout the early medieval period, there were Christian communities that continued to observe the Sabbath alongside Sunday. The Seventh-day Adventist movement, which emerged in the 19th century, actually traces part of its theological heritage back to these earlier groups who never abandoned Sabbath observance.
Motherfucking dick.
These communities argued that the Ten Commandments, including the Sabbath commandment, were timeless and universal, not merely Jewish laws that Christians could discard. Now, let me ask you something. If you're sitting in church on Sunday morning, have you ever wondered what the people sitting next to you would say if you asked them why they worship on Sunday?
Oh, she's cute.
Sunday instead of Saturday? If you asked your pastor or priest, would they even know the full historical answer? Many devout Christians have never questioned it. It's simply what Christians do. We worship on Sunday, but as we've seen, this wasn't always the case, and it wasn't inevitable. It resulted from theological decisions, social pressures, political events, and the gradual evolution of a religious community's practices over centuries. There's another dimension to this story that's worth exploring, the theological meaning that Christians began to attach to Sunday worship. As we mentioned earlier, Sunday was connected to the resurrection. But over time, Christians developed even more elaborate theology around the significance of the first day of the week. In medieval Christian theology, there was a fascinating practice called the Christianization of time. Christian thinkers and theologians worked to reinterpret the days of the week and the seasons of the year through a Christian lens. Sunday, the first day of the week, was seen as marking the beginning of a new creation. Just as God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh, Christians began to think of Christ as initiating a new creation through his resurrection. Sunday, the 8th day, in a symbolic sense, represented this new creation, this new order of being. The Sabbath, meanwhile, was reinterpreted. Rather than being a weekly day of rest, Christian theologians like Augustine argue that the Sabbath was a prefiguration of eternal rest in Christ, a spiritual reality rather than a literal day. This allowed Christians to maintain the theological significance of the Sabbath concept while moving the weekly day of worship to Sunday. This is important because it shows how theology can follow practice. The earliest Christians probably didn't have a fully articulated theological reason for worshiping on Sunday. It likely developed for a mix of historical, social, and pragmatic reasons. But over time, Christian thinkers developed rich theological justifications for the practice. They didn't say, "We changed the day for practical reasons." Instead, they developed doctrine that made Sunday worship seem like the inevitable fulfillment of Christian theology. There's a lesson here about how religions work. Practices often come first, and theology follows. People make choices for all sorts of reasons. Some theological, some social, some political, some pragmatic. And then later, thinkers go back and develop frameworks that make those practices seem doctrinally necessary. It's not cynical to point this out. It's just how human culture and religion actually function. If you're finding this kind of deep historical analysis interesting, now would be a great time to subscribe to Professor Archive and turn on notifications, so you don't miss our deep dives into religious history, theology, and the stories that shaped civilization. By the medieval period, Sunday as the Christian day of worship was so thoroughly established that it was embedded in the very structure of Christian society. In medieval Europe, Sunday was the day when Christian life organized itself around the church. You went to Mass. You participated in the liturgical life of the community. You abstained from unnecessary work. Sunday was sacred time in a way that echoed what the Jewish Sabbath had been, except that Sunday was now the authorized day for Christians. But here's something interesting. Christians didn't abandon the concept of the Sabbath so much as they transferred its sacred meaning to Sunday. Many medieval churches taught that Sunday was the Christian Sabbath. The obligation to rest on Sunday and attend church was presented not as a break from Jewish tradition, but as a continuation of it, redirected toward Christian purposes. The Ten Commandments still applied, including the commandment to keep the Sabbath holy. But Christians believed they were keeping it, just on a different day. This reinterpretation was important for Christian self-understanding. It allowed Christians to see themselves as the true inheritors of Jewish tradition, not as people who had abandoned God's law,
God
but as
ordained
people
the
who had
Sabbath
rightly
as the
understood
seventh
it
day.
through the lens of
You
Christ.
can't change the
This
day.
became a standard part of Christian theology, part of what we might call supersessionist theology. The idea that Christianity had superseded Judaism, that the church was the true Israel, and that Christian practices were the proper fulfillment of what Jewish practices had been pointing toward. Whether we find this theological move persuasive or not, it's historically significant because it shows how the shift from Saturday to Sunday wasn't presented as a radical break, but as a continuation, a fulfillment, a deepening of Jewish religious practice. Christians could maintain that they were faithful to Scripture and to God's law, while at the same time abandoning a practice that had been central to Jewish identity for over 1,000 years. Fast forward to the Reformation, and the question of the Sabbath and Sunday comes up again in new ways.
Okay,
Martin Luther and other Protestant reformers didn't question that Sunday should be the Christian day of worship. That was settled. But they did question some aspects of how the church understood and enforced Sunday observance. The Catholic Church had developed elaborate rules about what could and couldn't be done on Sunday. These rules were often enforced through church law and occasionally through civil law. Protestants tended to be more relaxed about some of these restrictions, while also sometimes being stricter about others. There was also a new Protestant emphasis on Scripture and returning to the biblical text. Some Protestant groups looked back at the biblical text and noted that there's nothing in the New Testament that explicitly commands Sunday worship. The shift to Sunday is described and referenced, but it's never commanded as a new law. This led to some interesting debates during the Reformation and the period of Protestant consolidation. The Seventh-day Baptists, a movement that emerged in England in the 1650s, explicitly rejected Sunday worship on the grounds that there was no biblical command to abandon the Sabbath. They argued that the Sabbath was part of the Ten Commandments, which they believed were moral law, not merely ceremonial law. If the Ten Commandments were still binding on Christians, then the Sabbath was still binding. The fact that the Sabbath was Saturday, not Sunday, didn't matter. Seventh-day Baptists would gather on Saturday for worship, just as Jews did. The Seventh-day Adventist movement, which emerged in the 19th century, inherited this Sabbath theology. Adventists, following the teachings of Ellen White and others, believed that the shift to Sunday worship had been a mistake, a falling away from biblical command. Adventists kept Saturday as the Sabbath, and saw their Saturday worship as a recovery of truth that had been lost when Christianity moved to Sunday. Interestingly, Adventists also believed that the shift to Sunday worship was connected to the rise of the papacy and the power of the Catholic Church, which they viewed critically. So for Adventists, the shift to Sunday was tied not just to theology, but to church politics. Today, in our contemporary world, the vast majority of Christian churches worship on Sunday. It's almost universal. But there are still communities, Seventh-day Adventists, some Seventh-day Baptists, and others, who maintain Saturday Sabbath observance. These communities are relatively small, but their persistence shows that the historical shift from Saturday to Sunday is not quite as settled as most people assume. It remains a live theological question for some Christians. What's remarkable is that most people, even most devout Christians, have never thought deeply about why they worship on Sunday. It's simply tradition, passed down, unquestioned. But as we've seen, this wasn't always the case, and it wasn't inevitable. It resulted from theological decisions, social pressures, political events, and the gradual evolution of a religious community's practices over centuries. This historical reality opens up some interesting reflection. When we participate in practices that are centuries old, like gathering for worship on a specific day, we're participating in something that stretches back through time. We're part of a chain of people who have made choices and lived them out. But those choices were made by people in specific historical moments, grappling with specific questions. Understanding the history doesn't necessarily change how we practice it, but it might deepen our understanding of why we do what we do. It might make us more humble about our practices, recognizing that they're not written into the fabric of the universe, but are the result of human history. Let me ask you this. Does knowing the history of why Christians worship on Sunday change how you think about it? Or are you someone who doesn't practice religion at all, but finds it fascinating to see how religions actually develop? Leave a comment below and let me know what you're thinking about all this. There's one more important dimension to this story, and it relates to how different cultures and different Christian traditions understood and experienced the shift to Sunday worship. The shift from Saturday to Sunday wasn't experienced the same way everywhere. In the Christian East, particularly in Orthodox Christianity, the development happened somewhat differently than in the Western Church. In Eastern Orthodox Christianity, both Saturday and Sunday have traditionally held significant places in the liturgical calendar. Saturday is honored as the day of rest, commemorating God's rest after creation, and also commemorating the Sabbath rest of Christ in the tomb. Sunday, by contrast, is celebrated as the resurrection, as the Lord's Day. Orthodox practice maintained a respect for both the Jewish concept of the Sabbath and the Christian emphasis on the resurrection.
Go ahead and take that fucking
The weekly
knife.
pattern in Orthodox churches often includes vigils on Saturday evening, leading into Sunday worship.
Now we'll
This
dick
creates a
that.
kind of recognition that both days
Shut my
carry
motherfucking
significance.
dick.
This is quite different from the Western pattern, where Sunday essentially replaced Saturday as the holy day. The Orthodox approach, which sees both days as important in different ways, represents a kind of synthesis that the Western Church largely abandoned. It suggests that the complete displacement of Saturday by Sunday was a specifically Western Christian choice, not something that was necessarily theologically inevitable. In the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which developed somewhat independently from both Western and Eastern Orthodox traditions, there were practices that maintained both Saturday and Sunday as significant days of worship. This shows that in various Christian traditions around the world, the simple replacement of Saturday with Sunday was not always the chosen path. These variations remind us that when we talk about Christianity shifting from Saturday to Sunday, we're talking about the trajectory of certain branches of Christianity, particularly the Western Latin Church, and eventually the Protestant churches that emerged from it. But Christianity is actually far more diverse than this single narrative suggests. Different traditions made different choices about how to relate to the Jewish Sabbath and how to develop their own practices. Here's perhaps the deepest insight we can draw from this history. Religious practices and traditions are not handed down from heaven. They're created by communities of people, working out their faith in specific historical contexts. These communities are shaped by their encounters with other cultures, their political circumstances, their theological reflections, and their practical needs. Over time, practices develop meaning and theological justification. They become traditional, then they become sacred, then people forget they ever had a history. But they do have a history. And understanding that history can help us understand ourselves, our faith, our traditions, our assumptions about what's natural and inevitable. The decision to worship on Sunday instead of Saturday reverberates across centuries. It shaped how Christianity related to Judaism. It influenced how Christianity integrated with the Roman Empire and later with European civilization. It determined the rhythm of Christian life and practice. It still does. When a contemporary Christian sits in a pew on Sunday morning, they're participating in a practice whose roots stretch back through centuries of history, back through the choices of councils and emperors and theologians and ordinary believers who decided what mattered and how to practice it. Does this knowledge change anything? That depends on you. It might make you more grateful for a tradition that's been passed down. It might make you more critical of that tradition, more inclined to question it. It might make you more humble about your assumptions. It might spark curiosity about other aspects of your faith, where they came from, what historical forces shaped them, what choices might have been made differently. What I hope is that this exploration has shown you something important. The history of religion is not dry facts and dates. It's a story of how human communities work out meaning in their lives. It's a story of theology and politics, practical choices and spiritual conviction. Tradition and innovation all mixed together in ways that are sometimes contradictory and confusing, but always fascinating. So here's what I want to know from you. What did you think? Does understanding the history of Sunday worship change how you think about the practice? Are you someone who observes Sunday as the Sabbath, or Saturday, or perhaps neither? And if you could change one religious tradition or practice, understand its history better, reform it, or deepen it, what would it be? Leave a comment down below. I genuinely read them and engage with what you think. And whether you're a long-time viewer or this is your first time in Professor's Archive, I want to thank you for spending 30 minutes exploring this question with me. If you found this exploration interesting, please hit the like button. And if you want to see more deep dives into history, theology, and the stories that shaped our world, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single episode. If you found this particularly valuable, consider supporting the channel through a super thanks or by becoming a channel member. Your support helps us create more content like this. Thank you for being here. I can't wait to see what questions you have in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.
Welcome back to the channel. In this video, R&Ra takes a hard look at the historical Jesus and how much of the familiar Christian story can actually be tied to a real person. He argues that generations of storytelling may have blended different people and legends into the Jesus Christians recognize today. It's a fascinating argument that gets more interesting the deeper they go. Let's get into it.
Christianity is largely about shirking responsibility. And Christians, of course, will not recognize this because they think that we don't, the unbelievers don't believe because we want to shirk responsibility. We're taking responsibility. We can't say the devil made us do it. Right? We don't break the law because we know it's the law. We know people invented the law, not God. Right? And so we're going to do what we can to support and enforce the law. Whereas Christians very often will try to say, well, it doesn't matter that I sexually molested my sister because Jesus has forgiven me and so I shouldn't be criminalized. Because, that argument was made by the Duggar family. trying to get out of prosecution. And lots of different Christians, once they got under charges, they try to use that argument. I'm soaked in the blood, and so I don't have to go up on charges. And that's, that way you don't actually have to do anything to help people. You can just pray for them that they'll accidentally get the help that they need without you doing anything about it. Because that's another shirking responsibility. And that it doesn't matter how badly we mess up this planet, because Jesus is going to come back any minute now to destroy everything anyway. So it doesn't matter if we try to preserve our resources, because we don't need to, because we are in the last days. We've been in the last days for 2,000 years. Right? Just to make it worse. But the big problem here is between in the mythicism and historicism is arguments like Barton. You try to put it in a category where you have Ehrman's argument, and Ehrman's argument is that Jesus existed, but he wasn't the Christ. Okay, so that's a step away from the typical Christian argument. Jesus existed and he's God. Right, or he's the son of God, or the more Muslim and Jewish argument that he's a prophet of God, or that he's just a shyster pretending that he knows God. He's Joe Biden saying, I know Obama. But then on the other side, on the other extreme side, we have Richard Carrier, who says there's absolutely no truth to the Jesus myth at all. It's entirely mythological, and there was no God. Well, Price and Fitzgerald, I think, were a little closer to my camp. And I know that Price is, because much of my inspiration actually comes from him. He said some things that are seem a little crazy too. But one of the things that Price has argued is that when you read Josephus, and Josephus is talking about how he found 3 people being crucified, and he recognized one of them, or he recognized his friend, and then he went to the magistrate, I forget the name. Anyway, I can't remember the name. I always have these moments. But a name that I can recall at any other time, I don't have now. But anyway, he went to go get the Roman magistrate to have these friends cut down, and they are cut down, and then one of them died, or 2 of them died, and one lived. I think that's the way it was. And then this is all being viewed from the opposite perspective when you read Luke. And suddenly you see Joseph of Arimathea, which is dangerously close to Joseph of Matthias. Joseph of Matthias. Now, if you look at how much the Muslims have corrupted the name of Noah and the name of Ecclesiastes, or the name of Satan, how they've changed that just in that little bit of time. Imagine, it's not hard to see how these names are corrupted, between Joseph of Matthias and Joseph of Arimathea. Right. So it looks like when you read Luke that we're talking about the same event. These people are both writing stories looking at each other while they're doing it. This is according to that's an out there kind of a theory, but it kind of makes sense when you think about this. And because other people are going to say, well, we have all of this other documentation of Jesus. Do you really? One of the problems is that when Joseph mentions James, the brother of Jesus, the Anointed, he's not talking about that Jesus. He's talking about Jesus of Daniels, son of who lived at a different time and is a completely different character. We know who that character was. We've got historical documentation for that guy. We don't have it for your Jesus, but we got it for this Jesus. We know that that's a different Jesus. Josephus wrote about 19 Jesusii. 19 different Jesuses. So, and Jesus of Daniels is 8-year guy. Now, Christians will adamantly argue that he is, and until you prove absolutely that he is not. Because they need absolute proof that their belief is wrong. They don't need the slightest proof that it's true. Right. But they need absolute proof that it's wrong, because they're going to be completely unreasonable.
Of course.
The problem is that there's a... I like to look at things in a bell curve. I try not to think in binary terms where you're good or evil or whatever. Most people on most subjects, we're kind of around here toward the middle. Then it just becomes an issue of, are we slightly left of or right of center, is what it comes down to most of the time. So, and I try not to deal with too many absolutes. There are few. There are things we know that are absolutely certain, like There was never a global flood. We know that for absolutely certain.
The best you can do is go back to Ice Age. That's like the best you can do. And even then, I don't know if water covered every mountain. I mean, come on, like...
God,
we can actually go back a lot further than that to previous ice ages, pre-Cambrian ice ages. At least two identified so far, where the entire planet is covered in a thin sheet of frost at least.
Right.
So anyway, and they wanted to call it ice age where everything was frozen, but the fact is that it would have to have been thin. Because there's not that much water on the planet. So like a thin frost, and then some actual liquid water in some pockets here and there. So getting back to the subject, there was a historic element to Jesus. It wasn't like Richard Carrier says, where it's just purely mythology. And when Bart Ehrman is talking about, well, we have record that there was, we have all these indications. Most of what he's talking about is simply Christian historians who grew up Christian were never going to question that, right? They're just never going to come about questioning. Well, they always
it just makes me feel
well, all these
rage when
historians
they say
accept Jesus was true. Well, yeah, they do when they were raised never to question that. And it's the ones that question when they say, well, I'm not sure Jesus did this. Now you're a mythicist, and now you're outside, and now we're going to shun you. But what the argument really is when we're talking about Jesus, I've heard arguments from Christians where they're actually talking about Jesus ben Ananias. And I'm like, that reference that you're talking about, that's not Jesus of Nazareth. That's not your Jesus. That's this other Jesus again. So then we have one of Ehrman's books, where Ehrman himself brings up the 16 different Gospels that never made it into the book. And so we have a hero character that everybody's talking about. And where did this hero come from? Right? Well, there might have been a real guy at the basis of this. Some of this. But then when you get to where we have certain books that are kicked out because he killed a child in one of these books, in one of these Gospels that didn't make it.
Wasn't he a child too or something? He was a child who performed magic on something because the kid was mad or some crap. I can't remember.
Yeah, and I like another one that was rejected, which is the Gospel of Thomas, in which Jesus said the only wise thing that Jesus has ever said in any of his Gospels, period, is one that didn't get into the book. In the Gospel of Thomas, they ask him, what do you think about circumcision? And Jesus says, if God wanted the people to be circumcised, we would have been born without foreskins.
Yep, that's right.
There you go! That's the only wise thing Jesus ever uttered, and that didn't make it into the book either. So there's another problem. So I argued with Fitzgerald, as I started to say earlier, that there are some things that Jesus did that are just so stupid that we would have to believe that this is a person that did this. There was a first century faith healer out there conning people who doesn't know when the fig season is, who doesn't know that farmers in his time at that time, in his location at that time, knew that there were seeds, other seeds, like the black orchid, that are smaller than the mustard seed. Jesus isn't a farmer, right? He claims to be a carpenter, maybe because he got wood. I don't know. But and this is why he's hanging out with male apostles. But he... And it was just something that Paul had issues with, because he obviously hated women and was seemingly closet queer himself. Yeah, I mean, why is it that the most adamantly anti-homosexual people are the ones that
are against you being with a woman?
The ones that we catch having sex with a male prostitute in the car, or snorting coke off their ass of a male prostitute, or going into a hotel room with a rent-a-boy whose advertising criteria was that he had an 8-inch uncircumcised penis.
Uncircumcised dick.
That's a weird, that's a weird.
And he was Brazilian.
Oh my gosh. Well, I tell you this real quick on the fig tree thing. I know that if we literalize that, of course, the fig tree, I know for a fact the small seed thing, that's obvious. But for the fig tree, I'm not so certain it's supposed to be taken literal in the aspect of whether it's meant to be Israel. And really, even if it isn't literal, it's still bad, because what it's saying is it's anti-Semitic in many ways, because it's saying the fig tree, this Israel's about to end. It's like really this anti-Semitic notion I get from the text is that, God's taking away what he had with sons of Abraham, and he's going to have new people seated at the table. It's like, oh, snap, what's going on here? But
exactly what David Fitzgerald said.
Right.
That's what he was explaining to me. When I said that this shows a fallibility of humanity, but he says, but it doesn't really, because all of these things are parallels, and each of these words refers to or implies or means. There's supposed to which is why I hate arguing Scripture, because I can read what it says and I can criticize what it says, but they always say, well, when it says this, it really means that, except on every other Thursday, or except when the moon's full, or when I want to argue with somebody else about a different thing. Then it becomes literal again, but until then it's metaphorical, or it's metaphorical when I can't defend it, and literal when I just want to make believe.
Right.
Yeah,
well, I heard this argument with Dr. Bob, and I'm sure you would attest to this because he brought up some fascinating things earlier and now. Dr. Bob was debating William Lane Craig on this, and William Lane Craig attacked the dying and rising God thing, right? Which we all, you, me, and Dr. Bob totally agree that it's there. I mean, it may not be exactly the way you want it. This God might not have been a man in any way, shape, or form over here that's Osiris or something else. And Jesus might be caricatured as a man. Oh, let's not talk like that. That's totally different things. I hear historians argue that all the time. Anyway,
Stupid!
On that note, I wish that Dr. Bob nailed this idea on the cross here during the debate, because he said, well, the problem with the dying and rising God thing is all the other dying and rising gods are agricultural. However, the New Testament's not. It's historical, this, that. Are you kidding me? Look at the parables. Listen to the agricultural